Welcome to the broadcast today. Brother Eric John Phelps, 24/7 World Radio, with my podcast, weekly podcast with Brother George Widger. It is August the 13th, 2024, on Tuesday here today. And so once again, we welcome our dear Brother George Widger to be on the broadcast, as he has always new information that further proves that the Jesuit order runs this country as well as the world. So, again, we're thankful for Brother George and all that he's done. And Brother George, welcome to the broadcast.
Well, thank you, Brother. Thank you, Brother Eric. As always, it's a pleasure to be on with you.
El gusto es mío, Señor. The pleasure is mine. That is one of the few things I remember from Spanish class. Go ahead.
Well, but all I remember from my high school Spanish was "Donde está el baño?" Where's the bathroom?
That's right. Got to know where that is. Okay, well, go ahead, brother, and we'll take it away.
Okay, my scripture verse, and we actually made, or actually you made reference to this last week, is actually Romans 1 and 2. Romans 6 verses 1 and 2. Romans 6 verses 1 and 2. What shall we say then? Shall we continue to sin that grace may abound? God forbid. How shall we that are dead in sin live any longer therein? Okay, so as I said, you made reference to this last week. This is in response to the scripture verse I shared last week. And there seems to be this perception, and it has been going on for, well, about 2,000 years, but definitely over the last several hundred years in Christendom, that, hey, people who attack the idea of perseverance or preservation of the saints, they say, oh, it's once saved, always saved. So that means I have my eternal get out of hell free card, so that gives me carte blanche to do whatever it is I want to do. Well, not exactly. And it was Martin Luther who coined the expression antinomianism, which literally means against the law. So there's been this major conflict over the last couple thousand years among believers, is the debate between antinomianism, against the law, and neonomianism, the new law, meaning that, well, yes, you are correct, that does not give us a blank check to do whatever it is we want. We can't continue to sin with impunity or have the desire to do so. However, on the other side, people say, well, yes, Jesus did die on the cross, and his death was sufficient for our salvation. However, but yet, unfortunately, alas, what about the sins we commit after our salvation? What happened? What about those that we commit after our conversion? Well, you need to do something about it. Jesus saved you, but you had to save yourself. You had to. Some people would argue that you had to. Salvation is monergistic, or rather,
it's a typical free will heresy. It's the typical God saved me, but I'm going to keep myself saved. I can't tell you how many Mennonites that I have spoken to about this matter. I asked one guy, I said, are you a Christian? Are you born again? He said, I'm a Mennonite. I said, well, are you saved or not? Well, I'm a Mennonite. Mennonite generally means it's work salvation. Well, they'll say that God saved me by his grace, but you're going to keep your salvation. And that is not New Testament salvation. That is heresy. That is free willism, that man has the ability to not only save himself, but keep himself saved. And so with that comes powerless preaching, powerless churches, and unthankfulness too. And also they do not comprehend the magnitude, if we can say comprehend, they do not appreciate the magnitude of the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. Because if something needs to be added to that, well, then let's just sin that grace may abound, and let's just do anything, because his grace is not sufficient. His finished work is not his finished work. So, no, this opens a whole can of worms to such a mountain of heresy that it was stoutly rebutted by Calvin in his Institutes and when he was preaching in Geneva, and also stoutly rebutted by Luther, because work salvation is Romanism, satanic papal Romanism. So when you have priests going to tell you what you need to do, you now have the ultimate absolute power of men over other people to control them, to get them to do what these evil, wicked priests want them to do. So that's really the touchstone or the stepping stone of this evil, wicked Pelagianism or free willism, or Arian, or Pelagianism and free willism primarily. Go ahead, brother.
Well, you made reference to Catholic Church, and I wasn't going to bring that up, but since you did, since you opened that door, is in the Catholic Church.
My brother. But go ahead.
I'm sorry?
I always do, my brother. I do my best to attack the papacy every time I'm on the radio.
Okay. Amen. So, anyhow, so the Catholic Church thinks or postulates that, yes, you are saved by faith alone, through grace alone, through Christ alone. However, Jesus paid for your past sins. He doesn't pay for your current or any future sins you might commit. So baptism, regardless of mode, washes away original sin, and that's usually administered shortly after birth, i.e. upon infants. However, you need to, so what about the sins you commit now or in the future? Well, that's what the confessional is for.
Hebrews answers that. There's a biblical answer, and then there's the papist answer. But go ahead, brother.
Okay, so if you're a Catholic, as a general rule, you had to go to confessional at least once a year.
That's right.
And there's no, I mean, granted, you can go more than once, but you had to confess all your sins, venial and mortal. Venial are minor sins, and
mortal are the bad ones. Venial and mortal. I remember I was growing up in Terra Hills, California. It was an Irish Catholic development. And the woman who sold her ranch there to the developers sold it under the condition that every street had to be named with an Irish Catholic name. So there was Flannery, and then there was Kevin Road, and then there was Cornelius and Shannon. And I grew up on Limerick Road, 2700 Limerick Road. So I grew up with all these Irish Catholics, Portuguese Catholics, Italian Catholics. And I remember them telling me, yeah, there's venial sins and mortal sins. I said, well, of course, I was an atheist at the time. I never read one passage of scripture. And so I wonder what they're talking about. But see, we went out and we sinned together. We went and cruised the Main and drank screwdrivers. We had orange juice and vodka. And my Catholic buddies were just as evil as I was. But see, they went and confessed it on Sunday and everything's okay. And I thought, okay, you guys are just going to go ahead and you think that's all gone. Everything's cool. Just ridiculous. All work salvation, brother. Go ahead.
Well, yeah. Yes, amen. Okay, so you remember a couple of months ago, I started talking about senior U.S. officers who died in World War II. Those are at least ranks of 05 or 06. So you're generally speaking, you're talking major general or above. And I came across a list of well over 50 names. And some of them you are familiar with them. Some of whom you may be familiar with. Others probably not so much. So probably somebody who most people never heard of was Major General Frank Candle.
Well, let's start off a little bit here, George. Let's do a little intro. The Jesuit order, with their Masonic Lodge and other secret societies, have been killing off our best officers for probably the last 100 years. So it's a design to shoot the officers down so that there is no leadership. And of course, the Jesuits follow the scriptures when it says, smite the shepherd and the sheep shall be scattered. So that's what they do. And they kill off our best officers. They did that with Patton and a host of others. So I just want the listener to realize that when you're naming these names, this is by design. It's by decree of the Black Pope that will get America into a war. But when they're in a war, we will kill their best officers to further disable them from having a real win. But go ahead, brother.
Okay, so somebody whom I'd like to talk about today is Major General Frank Candle Mahin, Mahin. He lived from the 27th of November and 27th of May, 1887, died on July the 24th, 1942. So he is 55 years old. And so, wait for it, he died in a plane crash in Tennessee. Now, he was in charge of the 33rd Armored Division. Yes, 33. Okay. So I don't know what he did wrong. Maybe he wasn't following orders. Maybe he just wasn't going along with the program. But he had a plane crash.
Well, I will say this. It happened in Tennessee, or was he Tennessean, or what?
Well, he was actually from Iowa, but he was killed in a plane crash in Tennessee.
Tennessee. Now, I just want to mention to the listeners that the Jesuits have a great hatred for Tennessee, because Tennessee put up a tremendous resistance to the Yankee Union invasion, and they were led, of course, by the great and good Nathan Bedford Forrest. So they hate Tennesseans, and they do anything they can to keep it down, because the manhood of Tennessee was a tremendous fighting manhood. And so they have pretty much broken it in the 20th century. But go ahead, brother.
Well, I wasn't going to talk about, okay, I said this almost every time. So you know what? I'm sorry for doing this, but one of my signature expressions is I wasn't planning to bring this up, but I actually was not planning on bringing this up. Well, the other day,
you know what that proves, George? You know what that proves? That proves you're so able to talk on a host of topics off the cuff, and that takes work to be able to do that. So, thank you, George.
Well, or sometimes I just look at the list of topics and I like to deviate from it. But anyhow, the other day I was watching a YouTube video called Infographics. It had to do with, and they talk about bizarre things like plane crashes and hurricanes and things like that. So one of the things they were talking about was the concept of fragging, which is a slang term for fragmentary grenade. And why is it that during the Vietnam conflict, so many U.S. officers were killed by their subordinates?
A lot of them were white officers, and they were fragged by the savage blacks. The blacks were fragging their white officers, primarily.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Or is it possible that it was simply a cover? They're killed not by the CIA, but Army intelligence because they were not playing ball, and they blamed it on some black soldier or some poor white.
The blacks were doing this. I mean, this is undoubted. I know it. I know men that were in non that were telling me that. But they could have just hired some of these blacks to kill this white officer, because the white officer really wanted to win. I told you about that guy. I know his name is Joe. Killed 18 officers in Vietnam. So on orders of the CIA. So no doubt they have a host of different tools, but the blacks and the whites so hated each other in Vietnam, and primarily the blacks hating the whites so much in Vietnam that it was easy to foment that murder among them.
Yep. Well, there's an addendum to this, but before I get to my point, so they're not exactly sure how common this was, because sometimes it's easy to cover up crime when you're in a war. You can say, hey, it's friendly fire, it was the wrong place, the wrong time. No, it was the enemy that killed him. But there are at least hundreds of officers who died under mysterious circumstances, and usually it was by the subordinates. Now, the term was fragmentary grenade. Sometimes people were stabbed, officers were stabbed or shot or whatever. And sometimes innocent bystanders who had nothing to do with the officer. There was just like the sergeant who happened to be the wrong place, he got taken out. But this was not just exclusively an American phenomenon. Actually, dozens of Australian officers were killed because Australia was also involved in Vietnam as well.
Right, they're historic white Protestants. So bring all those white Protestants in there so we can kill them in Nam.
Okay, so at least Now, people talk about there are at least close to 60,000 U.S. combat deaths, or they died of infections or some sort of secondary cause. But there's something like over 500 Australians who died in the conflict, and I have absolutely no idea why Australia was ever involved in the first place. That's another conversation altogether. Mm-hmm. So it was a very unpopular war in there as well. Now, so the interesting thing, almost nobody was ever prosecuted, and those who were, generally speaking, received relatively light sentences. The harshest punishment was 10 years in Leavenworth, and he got out after like 8 years or something. So this is a bizarre situation, because sometimes officers got killed or were targeted simply because they said, "Hey, don't show up on duty if you're stoned or drunk or whatever." These, most of them weren't real ogres, but some of them said, "Hey, you know what? You need to try to have a military bearing when we're out in the field."
That's exactly why the American Army lost North Africa when they were fighting Rommel. And then Patton arrives. And Patton says, we need here, you lost because we have discipline. We don't have any discipline here. So he started implementing discipline. And they obeyed him. And then with his discipline and them shining their shoes and getting their uniforms as they should and falling out and doing some marching or whatever, as they had their discipline restored, they then began to win. So that's right. Any officer that demands discipline, and when you're a white officer demanding discipline from a black subordinate, you have a real hard time, because everything you order them is looked upon as racism and prejudice. And that's the great success the Jesuits have done in forcefully race mixing this military that couldn't fight its way out of a paper bag if it was ever going to fight a white army, or an even Asian army like the Chinese and Japanese combined. Couldn't do it. Go ahead, George.
Okay, well, there again, I'm deviating from my script, and forgive me for doing that. Well, I don't have a script. I just have like a list of topics. But the other day, I rewatched a movie from the 1980s with Robin Williams called Good Morning Vietnam. Are you familiar with it?
I haven't seen it, no.
Okay, it came out in 1987. And it said it's based on a true story, so it is utter hogwash. So the character whom Williams played, he plays Airman Adrian Cronauer, who was in the U.S. Air Force back in the 1960s. And he did a year or so in Vietnam as a disc jockey, hence the name of the movie, Good Morning Vietnam. And so Cronauer played the contemporary music of his day, rock and roll. And in the film, he had all sorts of conflict with his superiors. Wait a second, play stuff that's like Perry Como, Frank Sinatra, big band stuff that was popular 10, 20 years earlier. And they said, well, I just wanted to play, what the troops want to hear, what most of the troops want to hear, rock and roll. The Beach Boys, the Rolling Stones.
James Brown. They brought James Brown over there, too. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So, anyhow, if you've not seen it, since you have, I would recommend it. Just look at it from a historian point of view and a social commentator, because this is something we talked about last week and previously. Because I'm not sure if Cronauer, who was a real person, knew this, but he was part of the psychological operation that was Vietnam by playing this rock and roll music. So what that did is it demoralized and destabilized the troops, whether you're blacks or white. It made them more homesick. It made them, probably most of them, go back to the States because, hey, I'd rather be back in Chicago or South Carolina or where it is I'm from, listening to this music rather in this hellhole way over in the middle of the jungle of nowhere. Also, well,
with never an explanation as to why they were there. Oh, we're going to fight communism. Oh, really? Do you know that the military government District of Columbia has financed and built communism since the 30s? Did you know that? And so we're going to go fight a communist North Vietnamese or the North Koreans when it's been built by District of Columbia and having prevented real resistance to those governments by like Sixth Fleet blocked in Chiang Kai-shek from Taiwan from invading Red China. So it's all a creation of the Jesuits running the District of Catholics, the District of Communists, the District of Columbia, to the detriment of particularly the white men of this country, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants and Baptists. And it's going to continue. Go ahead, brother.
Okay, so getting back to this film, Good Morning Vietnam. So as I said, Robin Williams plays this disc jockey who works for Armed Forces Radio, which is, by the way, is a CIA creation.
Is that right? Armed Forces Radio? Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, actually, it was an OSS creation, but the CIA, basically, they handed the mantle over to the CIA.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And of course, I'm not sure if Cronauer knew this, but he was just simply, a spook asset. So, because as I said, almost everything, every form of technology, every institution has been weaponized against the American people. And that includes the music.
Oh, sure. Because well, they changed the rhythm of it, the notes of it to be degenerative and attacking us. Yeah, it's a great big op, and it's all coming from the papacy, as those Jesuits are the masters of all the arts and sciences. And so being masters of the arts and sciences, they then, because they're a war machine, they are a military order, they decide to use it against their targets, which are historically white Protestant nations, especially this one.
Well, and of course, most of the men who are over there didn't know why we're there. My dad said he didn't know why he was over there. There was some sort of vague cover story. Oh, we're fighting communism. Yeah, that's it. And recently in Afghanistan and Iraq, we're fighting the war on terrorism. This has to do with 9/11 or something along those lines.
Some nebulous, stupid, unprovable thesis that I remember my father said to me, "You're going to have to go there and fight the communists. Got to do some time in the military and get them in Vietnam." I said, "Are you kidding me?" All my buddies were going to Nam. They were coming back addicted to dope. They were smoking Cambodian red. And I just a host of them got venereal disease from all those Vietnamese whores. It was horrible. And so I'm thinking, my buddy just said, "Eric, don't you dare go over there. You don't want to go. There's no reason to go." So that's why I went in the Air Force. But yeah, it's very demoralizing. There's no purpose. The very military they're fighting was built by the capital city here in the empire. And yet still the vast majority of American men did not get that this was a creation of the Jesuits ruling Washington on orders of the Black Pope in Rome.
Well, yes, indeed. And of course, in this film, there was no mention of the papacy, Spellman, or anybody like that saying that they had anything to do with this.
Of course not.
Now,
of course not. So that's why you have to read a book called The American Pope, written by John Sweeney, I believe his last name was. And he shows you there, and written in 1988, that Vietnam was called Spelly's War. Spelly's War. And when he went over there, he called the American soldiers the soldiers of Christ. And has that Spellman there dressed up in American fatigues, encouraging the troops. It's just awful.
Well, and of course, this, by the way, I have an addendum to some things I brought up before, something we've discussed, probably 2-3 years ago. Now, in the movie Good Morning Vietnam, or just about any film dealing with that conflict, such as Platoon or War on the 4th of July or Apocalypse Now, they almost never, as far as I know, they never mention the Catholic Church and specifically the Jesuits' involvement with that conflict. Now, there was an exception. There was a TV show that ran in the United States from 1966 1999, hosted by William F. Buckley.
John Cooney. John Cooney wrote the American Pope. Pardon me. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, thank you for that clarification. Okay. So in 1967, July the 8th, they Buckley had Robert Vaughn, who was starring in a popular TV show at the time called The Man from U.N.C.L.E., where he played Napoleon Solo. And so
I watched that program many, many times, and I want to thank you, George, for telling me about that video between William F. Buckley and Robert Vaughn. It's classic, but go ahead.
Okay, so I need to call. I mean, of course, Vaughn was very much a part of the machine. He was a Hollywood actor for decades. He was in that show, and he was in other things. And of course, he was a lifelong Democrat. He campaigned for Jack Kennedy in 1968, and for his brother Bobby Sr. For Jack in 1960, and Bobby Sr. in 1968. So he was very much part of the machine. However, they allowed him to make some critical comments about the Catholic Church, and specifically about Spellman. Okay, so
William F. Buckley came unglued too. Go ahead.
Okay, so in my opinion, Vaughn was allowed to do this for a couple reasons. One, virtually nobody watched the firing line. Probably less than 1% of the U.S. population ever watched it.
That's true. My father used to watch it. I can remember going, what are you watching this boring thing for? But my dad used to watch it. Go ahead.
Also, so Vaughn, as I said, had a checkered background. He was a hardcore leftist, a lifelong Democrat. As I said, he supported both the Kennedy brothers. Also, you could say, well, yes, they allowed Vaughn to make critical comments about the Catholic Church and about Spellman, who still was alive at the time. But they said, oh, okay, so what we'll do, this will be a controlled burn. Yes, we can talk specifically about Vietnam. We won't talk about all the other conflicts in which the United States or the Vatican has used the United States, such as Korea, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Iran. I can give probably numerous examples. Yes, Vaughn he was cleared to make critical comments about this. So
you're right. You have to. You're right, because you just can't go on TV and start making comments like that. They will shut you up, just like they shut down Jim Garrison when he was on Johnny Carson, and he showed those pictures of the tramps. And they shut that down right away out of Dallas. The three champs. Yeah, go ahead.
And but by the way, wasn't one of those alleged tramps Charles Harrelson, the father of actor Woody Harrelson?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. So, and of course, Woody Harrelson would later go on to be on Cheers, and I haven't really followed his career, but I know more recently he was in the Hunger Games. But so just talking about current events. Now, granted, this general Frank Mahan, that was over 80. So he died in a plane crash, as I said, in 1943 over Tennessee. Now, as I said, I don't know what he did wrong. Maybe he wasn't following orders. Maybe he broke the chain of command. Maybe he was going to talk. Who knows? So he had to go bye-bye.
That's right. That's why they have a far-reaching intelligence community, especially over the officers. They know what those officers are doing, thinking. They don't carry out an order without all the officers knowing about, without the NSA, CIA knowing all about it, military intelligence. Yeah, it's a unified group of traitors. Because if it wasn't, they would have solved the Kennedy assassination years ago. Because all the high command of the officers are nothing but traitors and cowards, and they want their retirement. They didn't say anything about it. I had an officer contact me, and I was preaching against Douglas MacArthur because he was a 33rd degree Freemason and working for Spellman. And the guy said, I'm a colonel, I'm a retired colonel, and I know that MacArthur was working for the Jesuits. He said, however, don't mention my name, because if you do, I might lose my pension. See, that's the mentality of these officers. They're not going to say anything because they're afraid, like little children, they're going to lose their pension, as if they can't live without that pension. So that was another great awakening for me that day. Go ahead.
Oh, okay, so, well, this is something I've discussed with people before. And so how are the Jesuits able to get people to engage otherwise decent, sane, normal, rational people to engage in indecent, insane, irrational behavior, such as being a concentration camp guard, or in order to enter a concert venue, or whatever. Well, all you have to do is say, hey, you don't want to lose your job, so what are you going to do when you retire?
Yeah. Hey, we got you enslaved on a mortgage payment, and we got you enslaved on a car payment, probably. Yeah, we have you enslaved in paying the income tax, so got that. So when we're done taking everything that we can from you, you don't have anything hardly. You can't have any savings for the most part. And so they're shipwrecked financially to do anything in resisting it. And that's exactly where the Jesuits want them.
Okay, so if I can mention something that's of a current nature. Well, okay, I have a follow-up to something else I said last week. That I guess last month, well, actually, the end of last month, Kamala Harris named Tim Walz, the current governor of Minnesota, to be a running mate. Well, actually, she didn't do it. Her handlers told her to do it, to pick Walz.
That's right.
And he he has an interesting sobriquet in which nickname in which he's known as
sobriquet. What is that, George? Please tell me what that is.
Well, that's French for that's French for nickname, but
nickname.
He's known as
it's a nickname.
Oh, okay, so he's known as Tampon Tim. I know that may sound crass, and yes, it is. But
what do they call him? Maybe I shouldn't even ask a question. I probably shouldn't ask a question. Just go ahead.
Well, you're right. You probably shouldn't, and I probably shouldn't answer. But since he became governor, he signed an executive order saying that all boys' bathrooms had to have female hygiene products in there.
When I was a boy, if they would have put those things in our bathroom, man, we'd have had a ball with that. We'd have torn them out, laughed at it, look at this, played games. I mean, that's what they're going to do anyway. It's just a demoralization. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Now, remember way back in the summer of 2020, known as the second summer of love, when the Black Lives Matter were basically terrifying the country. They're destroying the downtowns of just about every major city in the
blacks were carrying on. This was common with the savage blacks, the majority savage blacks, overseen by the Pope's white power structure to carry out their destruction to later justify the new right. But that's right, and they just loved it. They, in fact, loved killing some of their own people. They killed some decent black men in the process, but yeah, all overseen by the papacy and using certain court Jews in Black Lives Matter to bring this about. Go ahead.
Okay, so Walz was governor of Minnesota at the time, and he specifically did not order. He
didn't do anything, did he?
Yes, he did not order in the national.
A real governor would have called out the guard of Minnesota and said, "Shoot to kill, shoot them all." Every last one of them would throw them up in a big pile and burn them, not having any funerals for them either. And he starts shooting 200 or 300 of them, and that'd end real fast because they're all cowards.
So anyhow, and of course, that wreaked huge economic havoc on the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, but also several other major cities.
And what were the Twin Cities, brother? What's that heritage?
You're talking historically WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, Northern European.
Yes, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, Northern European Lutherans. So let's just destroy some more of these white Protestant peoples, their heritage, and their Lutheranism and their Protestantism. So we'll sick the savage blacks on them under George Floyd, who never was killed, by the way, and wasn't in his casket. But go ahead, George.
Okay, so that's the legacy of Tim Walz when he was governor of Minnesota. Well, he actually he still is governor there. And well, anyhow, and I need to bring up something else of a current nature. Boy, we've been on for over half an hour, and I'm surprised I haven't got to the death of Susan Wojcicki. What? But
Who is this?
how do I pronounce her name? Susan Wojcicki. Wojcicki. Wojcicki.
Wojcicki.
So she died on the 9th of this month.
Was she Polish, George?
Correct.
Oh, thank you.
She was born in Santa Clara, California on July the 5th, 1968, and died on the 9th of August, Nagasaki Day, at the age of 56 from lung cancer. In case you're wondering, no, she was not a smoker. She was diagnosed early last year with lung cancer, and she succumbed, as I said, a few days ago.
Mm-hmm. Well, no great loss. Just another leftist, socialist, communist, feminist. Goodbye. Enjoy yourself in hell to the great white throne judgment. Bye-bye. Next.
Well, this is inexplicable because according to her webpage, she was worth an estimated $765 million. Not quite a billionaire, but she wasn't she wasn't destitute. So I'm sure she could have.
Money? How did she get that money? Please tell me.
Well, probably having bake sales, lemonade stands, car washing.
Oh, George, you're so erudite.
Well, she became her academic background is she got her undergraduate degree from Harvard. She got her master's degree from University of California, Santa Cruz, and she got an MBA from UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles. Now, her father, Stan Wojcicki, was a law professor at Stanford. And
the Jesuit ruled Stanford.
Correct.
When Anthony Sutton came out with his book on Skull and Bones, America's Secret Society, it wasn't secret establishment. It wasn't long till he was a dead man, and he taught at Stanford. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Well, earlier this year in February, her 19-year-old son Troper was found dead in his dorm at Berkeley. So his death is still under investigation.
Well, maybe her death is a murder, and maybe her son's death is a murder, and for certain reasons, that's an absolute possibility. Because they kill their own if they get out of order. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and that's an entire possibility. Now, so why do I bring her up? Well, she was a chairwoman of YouTube from 2014 to 2023. And so under her watch, I don't mean to sound mean-spirited, but she was an iron-fisted thug.
As are all feminists. It's another reason why women do not belong in government. That's an arena only for men. And when a nation is under judgment of God, women rule. Women are in government. So she's just another ruling anti-male, anti-white male feminazi, and she obviously proved it with her ruling with an iron fist, I guess.
Okay, so
kind of like Sylvia Rambo over here, the district court judge here for many, many years in Harrisburg. They built a new building for her for the new courthouse, Sylvia H. Rambo. What a battle axe she turned into. And I had her for a case. But go ahead.
Okay. Oh, by the way, I was hesitant to bring this up. Yes, both her parents were. Her dad was a Polish Jew, and her mom was a Russian Jew. I don't mean to, I don't mean to add salt.
No, these are facts, George, and don't apologize for it. They're socialist, communist Jews. And all socialist, communist Jews are ultimately run by the papacy. Because the Jews don't run anything. By the way, there's a new book out. One of my supporters told me about it, Brother John Benson, and the book is called Super Mob. And in that book, Super Mob, the author talks about the mob in Chicago that recruited these Ashkenazi Jews to work for them in finance and so on. And they built this huge financial empire. The book is called Super Mob. It shows the Jews don't run anything, but they're working for the Sicilian mafia. And so it is with the communist Jews. They don't run anything. They're working for the papacy, like Chucky Schumer and Henry Killinger and all those other Masonic Jews working for the Archbishop of New York. Go ahead.
Okay, so now we gave Susan's obituary, but now I need to provide the receipts. So how do I correlate her to the Vatican? Well, something I mentioned probably about a month ago, 3 weeks ago, is there's the bank that financed all these big tech companies over the last century was Sequoia Capital. It was founded in 1972 by Don Valentine. And Valentine got his undergrad degree from
please talk a little slower. Pronounce your words better and talk a little slower because I don't pick it up. So please.
Okay. So back in 1972, Don Valentine founded Sequoia Capital, which financed all the future big tech companies that have come into existence in the Silicon Valley. And that refers to the area just south of San Francisco, near San Jose, in Santa Clara County. And Valentine, as I said, got his undergrad degree from Fordham University. So when I said he financed, Sequoia Capital financed all these big tech companies,
slow down. I was just trying to slow down and pronounce it clearly because this is very important. This Mr. Valentine, trained by Jesuits at Fordham, was the head of Sequoia National, this big bank, and that bank financed all the big tech companies, showing you the Jesuits finance and run the big tech companies. Okay, go ahead.
So what I mean everybody, I do mean everybody. Yahoo, Google, Wikipedia, 23andMe, YouTube, X, what they used to call Instagram, all of them.
So the Sequoia Bank, Sequoia National or International?
Sequoia Capital.
Sequoia Capital financed all of those?
Yes.
All of them?
Yes.
Well, that shows the Jesuit Fordham connection to controlling them all.
Correct. Now we talked about the bankrolling, but I guess the clearinghouse for all these corporations was Alphabet Inc. They basically got organized under Alphabet Inc., which in some form or another goes back to the 1970s. So the current board of directors, there are something like 3 or 4 prominent names. John Leroy Hennessy is on the board of directors for Alphabet Inc. Which basically
I had a broadcast against Hennessy once. I showed that Irish Catholic. He was the real head of it, controlled by the Jesuit order. Hennessy, yeah.
Okay, so John Leroy Hennessy was born on September the 22nd, 1952. So he's 71, almost 72 years old. He got his undergrad degree from Villanova University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
The place is huge, by the way. If you've ever been there, it's just huge. Go ahead. And they team up together with St. Joseph's University there in Philadelphia. So between Villanova and St. Joseph's, the Jesuits run the whole city.
Yes. So another member on the board of directors for Alphabet Inc. is L. John Doerr, who was born on June the 29th, 1951. So he's 73 years old. He's also he was on the board of directors for Kleiner Perkins, which is in Menlo Park, which is near Santa Clara. So he went to Chaminade High School, which is in Pennsylvania. I'm sorry, it's actually Chaminade High School, which is actually in St. Louis, Missouri. I made a mistake there.
Okay, so what's the name of it again? Just slow down in your pronunciation.
Chaminade.
Chaminade. What a name. Is that an Indian name or something? Chaminade?
It's French.
French, okay. Oh, that makes sense. St. Louis got a lot of French there, but okay, go ahead.
Okay, so another member of the board of directors for Alphabet Inc. is Ram Shriram, CHRIRMAN.
He sounds like a Jew.
Well, actually, he's Asian Indian. He was born in Madras, India.
I see. So he's East Indian out of India. Okay, go ahead.
Correct. So he went to high school He went to Loyola College High School in Madras.
Mm-hmm. Well, good. He's got a nice, good Jesuit high school education. What did he do after that?
Well, he worked for Google. He worked for Amazon. He worked for Netscape. So his entire career has almost been in big tech.
Jesuit big tech. Uh-huh. They love their East Indians because they're so obedient. They come from a culture where they just do what they're told, and there's no fighters among them, no real contenders for liberty. So they just come from a culture of do what you're told, and when they come here, that's exactly what they do, which is not the American way. Not the biblical white Anglo-Saxon Protestant and Baptist way, I should say. Go ahead.
Okay, well, yes, in Greek, indeed. So, anyhow, as I said, Susan stepped down last year. Now, whether she was probably murdered, but how or why, we're not exactly sure. It could have been from the injection. Who knows? Oh, by the way, so you may be wondering who replaced her as the head of YouTube. Well, I'm sure
you support me because YouTube has kicked me off probably 10 or 15 times. And it's Brother Vlad that keeps getting me back on. So YouTube is a real Jesuit, socialist, communist operation. And so I'm sure that she was part of that. And who replaced her then, George?
Well, his name is Neil Mohan, Mohan.
Sounds like an Irish Catholic.
Well, funny you should say that. That's what I've actually known other Mohans, but he's actually of East Indian descent. Oh. However, Mohan.
Maybe there's a white man in the woodpile somewhere. Remember, there's a Brit in the woodpile. Excuse me.
Well, yes. So he grew up in Lafayette, Indiana, and he went to St. Francis High School in Lafayette, Indiana.
Is that St. Francis Xavier?
Yes, it is actually.
Good Jesuit. Good. What would we do, George, without all these Jesuits teaching us and giving us an education? Why, we'd be lost without them. We might have our own country, maybe. We might have a manhood. We might have nationalism and patriotism, maybe. Go ahead.
Okay, so getting back to Susan Wojcicki, who just died, was 4 days ago or so we're told. Now, it's possible, she was murdered, her son was murdered. Who knows? Maybe it was a turbo cancer. Speaking of which, I wasn't going to bring this up, but somebody sent me an article from CNN that, according to CNN, cable news network, that cancers among men are expected to double in the next year.
Well, why would that be, George?
I have no idea. So anyhow,
I think it might have something to do with the injection.
Well, that sounds like an unfounded conspiracy theory.
Oh, here we go. That's right. We're all a bunch of conspiracy theorists, George. No matter how many facts we put out there, conspiracy theorists. Mommy's talking about conspiracy, Mommy. Go ahead, brother.
Well, okay, if I could just share an observation. As you know, I live just north of San Francisco, about an hour or so. And one of the major AM radio stations here, or used to be, was KGO 810. And for a long time, I mean, for decades, it was news talk.
Yeah, but I remember KGO. Yeah.
Okay, so it feigned to be neutral, but the last several years, they put away all pretense of that. They said there's like an uber communist CIA platform. So that was the case up until October of 2022, just about 2 years ago. Then they switched to a sports betting platform. So they kicked off all their talk show hosts. And so it's still an intelligence platform, but they just simply changed the format. And and as I said to you before, almost all the talk show hosts, I don't mean to stereotype, were either Catholic or Jewish. There are one or two exceptions.
That's right. Jews or blacks. Catholic Jews or blacks. You got talk show hosts or black too.
Okay, so But something else I noticed is that there are a couple of personalities. Kim, these names may sound foreign to most of your audience members, but there was a newsreader / fill-in host named Kim McAllister, whose husband was in the Marines. And there was, now I don't know what her religious background is. I do know.
Try to keep near your microphone, George, please. You're getting away from your microphone. So you go quiet.
Sorry about that. Okay. I don't know what her religious background is, but I do know she went to University of California, Davis, and she was a member of a fraternity there, because I know on social media she posted basically the devil horns hand sign. So she's basically a female Freemason, or whatever it is they call
she an Eastern Star?
Daughter of the Eastern Star.
Eastern Star? Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Just like Hellcat Hillary, yeah. Just like that mulatto that started the Civil Rights issue in 1954, Rosa Parks. You know, she was Eastern Star too. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. As is the current governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer.
Mm-hmm. Well, she's an Eastern Star too, huh? She's an Eastern Star. Oh, great. See, they all get their orders and they all do what they're told. Mm-hmm. To bring us all into right. But go ahead, George.
But here's a factor. So I don't know about Kim's religious affiliation, but they had another host on there named Nikki Maduro, who grew up, I guess, Italian and Puerto Rican Catholic, and she was Catholic educated. Now, she's not a professed believer now, but it's interesting. Both of their husbands have military backgrounds. Kim's husband's name is Dave, and he was in the Marines. And Nikki's husband, James, was in the Navy. So odds are, okay, this is pure speculation on my part, but odds are their husbands are their handlers.
It makes sense to me. Were they connected to intelligence at all while they were in the military?
I have no way of knowing that, but odds are that's the case, because Dave McAllister, Kim's husband, is in, I guess he's in computers, which is a very vague term. And so, you know, you had to, in order to live in the San Francisco Bay Area, you had to have, generally speaking, you had to have money. And oftentimes you had to have an intelligence background. Yes, that's the case in other places as well, but that's especially true around here. I'm not sure if, well, actually, I think I share this. My dad was career Air Force. That's public knowledge. The last place he was stationed was Hamilton Air Force Base in Nevada, Marin County, before he got closed. But otherwise, there was no way I would have ever ended up out here. And that's how a huge number of people end up in places like California because of the military. Either they were stationed when they're in the service, or their parents were, specifically their dad. But anyhow, so the people, whether they knew it or not, most of the people working in KGO radio, when it was a news talk format, were intelligence assets.
You know, I remember KGO was very, Brother George, I remember KGO was very leftist, what I used to listen to. Because I was, you know, being groomed and for the John Birch Society, and many of those things that those people said were absolutely true. But who done it? They're all wrong because they blame the Jews. But yeah, KGO is always leftist, always socialist, communist. Yep.
And it was owned by Cumulus, and I think I mentioned this to you before. But was it Mary something or other? The president of Cumulus. I forgot her last name, but she went to Boston College. But
Boston College. Now, what is that, George?
Jesuit.
Jesuit, and it's a huge campus with many multi-million-dollar buildings on it. Probably one of the three most influential schools on the East Coast: Boston College, Fordham, and Georgetown. Yeah, all in the Northeast.
Okay, and I have a follow-up to something I brought up a couple of years, probably 2 or 3 years ago. Do you remember discussing Saul Alinsky?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Good old Saul Alinsky, the Jew, who was a perfect friend of Greg Galuzzo. The Jesuit that trained Barry Davis Obama?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Saul David Alinsky. He lived from the 30th of January, 1909, died on June the 12th, 1972. So he was only 63 years old when he died. And actually, just prior to his death, I mean, months just prior to his death, he gave an interview with Hugh Hefner for Playboy magazine, in which he talked about his
CIA asset Hugh Hefner. When Alinsky was a CIA asset also. Yeah.
Yes. So Saul Alinsky grew up in Chicago, and he made a name for himself as a community organizer.
And they were both Jews, both CIA assets. Okay, go ahead.
Yes. Now, I don't know if Alinsky had a military background. I know that Hefner did. Yeah. So he wrote a book, or he's alleged to have written a book in 1971 called "Rules for Radicals," a pragmatic primer, in which he defended both the confrontation and compromise involved in community organizing as keys in the struggle for social justice.
Social justice. So that further shows his Jesuit connection, because there's no such thing as social justice without Jesuit Luigi Tapparelli, who created it. Yeah. Go ahead. And by the way, there's no such thing as social justice. There is acts of righteousness and justice performed by individuals every day that bring about justice in your culture. But there is no such thing as social justice other than communism and shoving it all down your throats, as the Jesuits are masters of. Go ahead.
Okay, so so I need to provide the receipts for Alinsky. Now, he got his PhD from University of Chicago.
Rockefeller University of Chicago. Remember, Rockefeller patterns his Standard Oil Trust after the Jesuit order, and he considers himself to be the Jesuit general, according to the career of John D. Rockefeller, written in 1912. Uh-huh.
Yes. So, but what is even further proof about his Jesuit control, or his Vatican, or the Rome's control of him, was in 1969 he received the Pacem in Terris Award, the Peace on Earth Award. Now, Pacem in Terris, what does that sound like to you?
Wait a second. Saul Alinsky gets the Peace on Earth Award? Is that what you said?
Okay.
And it's a Catholic, and it's a Catholic award?
Well, bear with me one moment. So the Pacem in Terris Peace and Freedom Award is a Catholic Peace Award, which has been given out annually since 1964, with a couple of exceptions, and I'll get to that in a moment. In the year 1963, the encyclical Pacem in Terris, Peace on Earth.
Now, slow down, George, please. Pronounce it slowly.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're going to miss it. Okay? Go ahead.
All right. So I'll start again. The Pacem in Terris Peace and Freedom Award is a Catholic Peace Award, which has been given annually since 1964 in commemoration of the 1963 encyclical letter Pacem in Terris, Peace on Earth, by Pope John Paul XXIII. It is awarded
so
to
that's
quote,
Pacem in Terris, Pax being
correct.
peace, and Menteris, is that how you say
correct.
it? Okay.
Terris is like territory, territorial terrain.
Pax and Terris. Pacem and Terris, is that what you said?
Correct.
Because Pax is peace, Terris is earth, from like Tierra, earth. Okay, I see.
So
peace on earth under the Pope. That's what it is.
Yes, and goodwill towards man.
Goodwill towards man. That's right. Well, we're busy killing all the heretics and liberals. That's goodwill.
Okay, so it was promulgated by Pope John Paul the 23rd during Vatican II.
Pope John the 23rd.
And
Pope John the 23rd, not John Paul.
I'm sorry, what did I say?
Pope, you said Pope John Paul the 23rd. It was Pope John the 23rd.
Oh, thank you for the correction. Well, I'm just thinking the future. I got my time machine.
Yeah.
And so there have been 20. There have actually been 20 more John Paul II's. So that's how I was able to just. Okay, yes, thank you, John the 23rd.
John the 23rd. He was a commie, notorious communist, paving the way for the papacy to be outwardly communist when it was overtly anti-communist, but secretly absolutely communist. That's why they ran Joseph Stalin. Gave him all his aid through Averell Harriman and these other senators here in the District of Columbia to build his military-industrial complex. Yeah. But go ahead, George.
Okay. So that was the international element of the prize. But to give you the local or semi-local element to it, it was first awarded in 1963. It was started by the Davenport Catholic Interracial Council of the Diocese of Davenport in Iowa. You catch
the
that?
Interracial Council, I see. So we're now going to force race mixing with blacks and whites. And by the way, when they started shoving that down our throats with my Catholic friends, they didn't like it at all. But that's okay. We're going to forcefully race mix the Catholic churches, and we're going to have interracialism because, after all, you know, however they're going to justify it with John Lafarge, who was the big Jesuit pushing Catholic interracialism. Go ahead.
Okay, so some of the other recipients besides Alinsky were John F. Kennedy, no surprise there, Michael Martin Luther King Jr., no surprise there, Sergeant Shriver.
Sergeant Shriver, who was in
the father of Maria Shriver.
Who was in the Kennedy clan, and he married what? One of the Kennedy women. Yeah.
Correct. And he's Maria's father, and he was Arnold Schwarzenegger's father-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
A. Philip Randolph.
Yeah, go ahead, George.
A. Philip Randolph.
A. Philip Randolph, the Black Freemason, head of the sleeping car porters, calling for miscegenation in the 1920s, I believe. And then in the 30s, because A. Philip Randolph was overseeing Martin Lucifer King. And I have a picture of A. Philip Randolph sitting with King and John Lafarge in the book on Catholic interracialism, which was led by John Lafarge. So do you think any of these black leaders were for the black people? Not one of them. Not A. Philip Randolph, not Martin Lucifer, none of them, because they're run by the Jesuits. That's why there should be no statue of Martin Luther King anywhere in this country. You're going to tear down Nathan Bedford Forrest. We're going to tear down every Martin Lucifer King statue because he was nothing but a communist working for the Jesuit order in Boulay, as well as a very wicked and immoral man. So let's just start tearing down all those statues too. We're going to tear down statues. We're going to start with him.
And just for clarification, and I know I brought this up before, and his birth name was actually Michael King Jr. He never actually legally changed it to Martin Luther King.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yes, he never legally changed his name. I learned that from reading a Bible Believer's Bulletin by Dr. Ruckman many years ago. Not that I agree with everything that he said, but he said a lot of things that were true, and that was one of them. Yep.
And you know, I mentioned Sergeant Shriver, who was part of the Kennedy clan, as you said. He was also father to Maria Shriver, and briefly he was, well, actually for a while, he was Arnold Schwarzenegger's father-in-law. But do you know that it was under Sergeant Shriver actually founded the Peace Corps back in the early 1960s?
He founded the Peace Corps?
Well, it was probably the Jesuits. They just simply used him.
Well, yeah, they just used him up front because the Jesuits were absolutely behind the Peace Corps. It's anything but the Peace Corps.
So are you saying they engage in espionage, subversion,
absolutely,
intrigue?
Remember, it's a corps, George. It's a corps, C-O-R-P-S. It's a military corps with military maxims to carry out under the guise of peace. So
are you saying the Shriners aren't benevolent and do-gooders?
Well, that's what they want you to think when they have the little stupid-looking Shriners parade every year with their pointy toes and hats that they have on, riding their little cars. I mean, they look crazy. But they're men of power, big bankers.
Well, hey, they do all sorts of good. What about their burn units?
Oh yeah, they're burn units. Where the things that they do increase pain. Like if you're burned, you should be spraying silver, some sort of silver, ionic silver on your burn to keep it from getting infected and will facilitate healing faster. They don't spray anything on those burn victims with silver like that. And the Israelis, they figured out a certain stuff, I forget where they got it, where you put it on a burn and it immediately starts to get rid of the pain and the heat. But we can't do that here. We're going to give them some drugs or spray them down with some other stuff. So their burn centers are torture centers. That's what they are.
Oh, no, wait a second. I can't accept that. So, and of course, what about Danny Thomas and the St. Jude Foundation? What about, I'm sure they must do good.
Yeah, good little Catholic. Regardless of his term, he's a good Catholic. And Marlowe, and they're married to that fanatically leftist communist Donahue. So, yeah, we're going to have Danny Thomas there. And there's a certain doctor, I forget, I think it's Lee Merritt, who said that St. Jude, quote unquote, hospital has one of the highest, most advanced pathological labs in the country. What for? Why do they have that there? Because they're creating cancer. They're facilitating the growth of parasites and fungus, which is what cancer is. And throw a little bacteria in there, and you really have something that you can kill people with if you don't kill the bacteria, fungus, and parasites. Just treat them with their drugs so they can torture them to death. Torture those poor little children to death. Go ahead, George.
Oh, okay. So, boy, gee, I don't like your tenor, because you're saying that all these benevolent charitable organizations like the Shriners and St. Jude's are actually hurting people. Next thing you're going to say is that Catholic charities and Jesuit charities are nothing more than front groups for basically foreign invaders.
That's correct. Amen, Brother George. That's right. So remember, black is white and white is black. So whatever the term they give to it is exactly the opposite. Like the Patriot Act. They ought to call it the Treason Act. And just all their acts, you just turn it right around. That's what they really are. Black is white, white is black. Just like Loyola said in his secret instructions. Go ahead, George.
Okay, so I realize I'm being a little facetious, but yes, you're absolutely right. So it seems as if that, and this has become materialized over the last, say, 4 or 5 years, that anything that they tell us to do is for our own good, or for our own health, may not be the case. For example, oh yes, stay home.
Stay home. All these white men. That'll be good for us all. We got to get rid of these white men. Just kill them off the face of the earth. That's good for us. Big propaganda with that, creating larger and larger every day. Go ahead, George.
Okay, so they say, stay home, save lives, stay 6 feet apart, wear a mask, wear 2 masks, wear a dozen masks, get a shot, get a booster, close your business down, or adhere to implement so many restrictions you might as well shut it down. Have it open at 50% capacity, at 25% capacity, whatever. Is all for your own good. So don't worry.
Because they're looking out for us, George. Well, they're looking out for us now. They're really helping us. Come, let me help you. Go ahead. Michael Savage used to do a great thing on that. Let me help you. Go ahead.
Okay, so this is nonpartisan. So I was talking trash about Kamala and her running mate Tim Walz. Well, you can say the same thing about the Republicans. So right. Here in the United States, we have two major, as I've said before, we have two major political parties. We have the communist socialists, and you have the controlled opposition. And,
right. Which is secret fascism. It's quasi-fascism, but masked up right now.
Okay, so
the leftists build the right. That's exactly what they did in Germany. The leftists, communists, Antifa, and all those other bastards building up the new right that would be led by Hitler. That's what they're doing here. Same exact thing. Go ahead, George.
So, and you know, I made reference to KGO radio back when it was under its old format, being a talk show, and I actually phoned in there a few times to try to not to change the mind of the host, but perhaps so I could reach some of the listeners. And this actually happened 3 years ago when they're still under the old format. I phoned in there, and I was going to talk to the host about Kerry Mullis. And I said to the screener, I said, hey, did you know that Kerry Mullis said that he never designed the PCR to diagnose anything? It was just simply, he only meant it to magnify DNA results. And the screener said point blank, oh, that's right.
George, you're confusing us with the facts. Stop it. Go ahead, George.
So the screener wouldn't let me on, and he said, that's just simply a right-wing talking point, which has been debunked. Okay.
When the man said it himself in his own words on a video, how are you going to debunk that?
Oh, it's obvious. Fake news. So anyhow, so I know we mentioned this before that William Randolph Hearst, who was a big media mogul back in the late 19th century,
and who was the controller of the media back in the 1920s. Yes, sir.
Okay, so back in the early 1898, he told his reporters for the San Francisco Examiner, because I guess he didn't want this, the Jesuits did. He wanted to foment a war between the United States and Spain. So, but most Americans didn't want that because most Americans had nothing in Spain. So they said, hey, if they were to attack us, maybe that would change their mind. So he told his reporters, he said, you get me the pictures, I'll provide the war. And on February the 15th, 1898, there was a little mishap in Havana Harbor where the USS Maine blew up, killing all 266 sailors aboard.
I have a guy that contacted me. He said, Eric, I have all the proof that the Jesuits blew up the USS Maine. I said, well, I'd love to have it. Never sent it to me, but I know it's the case. They always create a war with a naval issue. And this is one of the classics.
Okay, so you could say that Hearst was into fake news before fake news became cool, before that was even a thing. Yeah. And so just imagine how much more.
He was also big in Hollywood, too. Because Hollywood's got to brainwash the people how to think, what to believe in the past, got to brainwash them with a false history. Yep. Go ahead.
Well, yeah. So anyhow, his granddaughter Patty Hearst went to St. Ignatius High School in San Francisco. Most people don't know that, but
so Patty Hearst, who was busy fornicating with the black savages of the Sudanese Liberation Army or Liberation Front, right? That little tramp.
Yes, and of course, the Sudanese Liberation Army was a complete FBI creation. Now, for what it's worth, they only had 9 members, but 8 of whom had a Catholic background.
And they were all black for the most part, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
Yeah. So we're going to use Tobies. We're going to use these black Tobies to be arrogant and hostile and kidnap, supposedly, Patty Hearst, and to further drive the white people into the new right. When these blacks were traitors to their own people, facilitating the rise of the new right.
Yes, indeed. And
I'm not new to this because I know the nephew of Huey Newton. That nephew called me. We talked for a couple hours one night. Complete and total agreement with what I've had to say here. All these black leaders are nothing but traitors. And then, of course, they murdered Huey Newton. If you got out. So all controlled by the white power structure to use these radical blacks to drive the whites into the new right and to drive the blacks into savagery and crime. So it's a great, great op that they have going here. I didn't mean to get you off topic, George. Go ahead.
Well, of course, that what makes her stream so interesting is I always enjoy your inputs, your questions, and your commentaries and where you try to keep me on the right path. You usually fail miserably, but anyhow.
Someone's got to try, George.
Well, yes. But anyhow, a few weeks ago, I was watching a YouTube video. Speaking of YouTube, because it's valuable. I mean, there's some value on YouTube if you want to learn about. If you want to learn about. Okay, I'm sorry.
Of course there is. There's a lot of good stuff on YouTube. Mm-hmm. I love all their animal specials and other things that they do there. You can learn a lot from YouTube, but you got to filter out the propaganda, making you a communist and making you anti-white, making you anti-gun, and every other thing they want to do to you to further destroy the place. But go ahead.
Okay, so about a month ago, I was watching a video, an exchange between William Lane Craig and Catholic Bishop Robert Barron. Are you familiar with either of those figures?
No, I'm not. No.
Okay, so William Lane Craig is probably the premier evangelical, whatever that is, apologist today. He makes a very cogent argument for the existence of God, for biblical Christianity, and things like that. However, don't mean to sound malevolent, mean-spirited, but he's controlled opposition because he's very good at attacking astroturf enemies, such as secular humanism, whatever that is, and neo-atheists. He said,
well, so the Supreme Court said secular humanism is a religion. Remember that?
Okay. And so Craig has said that, we Christians need to stand up to these people, these secular humanists, and say, yes, there is a God.
Yeah. What he needs to say is, listen, we white people, we white Christian people, Catholics, Protestants, whatever, we need to stand together in the new right. That's what he ought to be saying, but he won't go that far. That'd be a little too much truth.
Okay, well, he hasn't delved into politics, at least not as far as I know. But so, who exactly is William Lane Craig? I conflated.
Say that slower, George. Sir William Lane Craig. Is that what you said?
Yes, sir.
Okay, take it easy. Just slow down.
So he's 74 years old. He was born on August the 23rd, 1949. I think he's semi-retired now. He was a professor at Talbot Theological Seminary in Los Angeles, or near Los Angeles, and he was also
blocked out Talbot Theological Seminary. What's the seminary again?
Talbot, which is in Los Angeles.
Talbot, yeah. You had Dr. David Feinberg. He was there. He wrote the classic work called "Is the Virgin Birth in the Old Testament?" And David Feinberg I think he founded Talbot.
Okay, he could have. So anyhow, he got his PhD from University of Munich, Universität München.
Munich. So he's going in with the Jesuit Catholics in Munich. Yeah, go ahead.
So it used to be known as University of Ingolstadt, which was founded.
Illuminati. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, that's where he got his PhD, and when he was a student at Wheaton, where he got his undergrad degree, he is a student of Norman Geisler.
I was just going to bring up Geisler. Geisler got his PhD at Loyola in Chicago, and he went down to teach at Dallas Theological Seminary. But it doesn't surprise me because Dallas uses the same heretical pro-Catholic Greek text as the Jesuits do, Westcott and Hort. So once you go to that heretical Bible, it's all unification with the papacy. When I was in Bible college, they gave me a textbook on the New Testament. I had a New Testament class and Acts of the Apostles, something like that. And they gave us his book by Norman Geisler. Yeah, but go ahead.
Okay, so he also, Geisler, in addition to getting his PhD from Loyola Chicago, he also did additional studies at Detroit Mercy, which is Jesuit.
That's right. Detroit Mercy. I think that was connected to Charles Coughlin, Father Charles Coughlin, with his Church of the Little Flower. Yeah, another Jesuit university. So we have all these
yes.
we have Protestant ministers now feigning to be right-wing and conservative, but trained by Jesuits. Now, what do you think is the end game of that? To unite all these apostate Protestants with the Catholics together to stand together and the new right, and we're going to have what's that other operation they had for the Promise Keepers? We have the Protestants and the Catholics together, and the Mormons as Protestant Promise Keepers. It's just one great big ecumenical movement for the political new right in the making.
Well, and of course, you made reference to Promise Keepers, which goes back to, I guess, the 1980s.
Yep.
Well, you have which is a men's group where men get together at stadiums or whatever, and they yell at the top of their lungs and say, "Do you love Jesus? Amen." And well, they actually have a female version of it. It's called Women of Faith. So basically, they call it Promise Keepers with a skirt. Basically, and these movements aren't sinful or heretical per se, but
no, they are, because
that is
they're
how
compromised, George. They're compromised, and they are not practicing the biblical doctrine of separation of 2 Corinthians chapter 6. So it's one great big hodgepodge of people that call themselves Christians, so we can all get together with Glenn Beck and all those other sinners.
Now, you made reference to Glenn Beck.
That's
now,
right.
He's a Mormon, and I guess he's involved with 12 steps because he had a serious drinking problem. I believe he was involved with Alcoholics Anonymous.
Satanic Alcoholics Anonymous 12-step. Right. Okay, goody.
And well, actually, I've mentioned this to you before, but now most people know about the two alleged founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, William Wilson, aka Bill W., and Robert Smith, MD, Dr. Bob. But somebody who most people don't know about is Father Edward Downing, SJ.
Father Edward Downing, SJ, with Alcoholics Anonymous. Well, they probably founded that for the priests. Yeah, teaching that heresy. Once an alcoholic, you're always an alcoholic. That heresy, that lie. Yeah. Go ahead, brother.
Okay, so Downing was a Jesuit, a full-on Jesuit, not a lay Jesuit, not a short robe, but a full-on priest. And so he basically inspired Bill W. to write the 12 steps. And so even
12 free will salvation by word steps. There we go. It goes right back to heretical theology, heretical Pelagian free will theology of Rome. Yeah, it's the same thing, just under another name.
Okay, so Bill W., who died in 1971, spent the last 30 plus years, 40 years, however long it was of his life, as a teetotaler. Well, amen. However, when he died in 1971, he left some of his estate. He bequeathed his widow a certain amount of money, and he left a certain amount of money to his mistress.
Well, that's a good idea. I mean, if the wife's not taking care of you, just get a mistress. You realize in France, the majority of married men in France all have a mistress. Mm-hmm. So that further shows you why France is a wrecked country. Yeah.
Well, I think I mentioned this to you before, but now you're talking about France, but we want to look at other European countries. I understand in places like Sweden, Denmark, Norway, cohabitating couples are actually more common than actually married couples. I forgot the exact split, but that's also the case in Germany. And in places like Germany,
is that right?
It's just, yes, people expect you to live together.
It's that bad in Germany and Sweden, huh?
Yes.
Well, no wonder they're in the judgment of God, bringing all these savage Muslims and blacks into their countries, raping, pillaging, and plundering. That's the reason why. Yeah.
And well, so something I wanted to mention is, this is completely off topic, and this really doesn't have anything to do with the Jesuits, because he predated them probably by about 100 years. But have you ever looked at much into the life of Emperor Constantine?
A little bit. he's to be built Constantinople. He left Rome and went east and built the eastern part of the empire. And of course, he was the head of the council there in what 330.
Are you talking about Nicaea?
Yeah, Nicaea, which was a satanic council, and seeking to unite the empire and having nothing to do with Jesus Christ of the Bible. Although maybe Athanasius might have been there, he was a Christian, but the rest is just empirical political power under the guise of religion. Constantine was a pagan. He worshiped. It was sun worship. He never knew the Lord, and even though he stopped the persecution in 312 or so, he still was not a Bible-believing man of God. He was a pagan.
Okay, so what Emperor Constantine? And so just for clarifications, his dates were 272 to 337. So he was born on or about, well, depending upon the calendar, the 27th of February, 272 AD to May the 22nd, 337. So the story goes, or the legend goes, is that he was supposed to be engaged in a battle, and he saw a sign in heaven in English, "Under this sign you shall conquer." So that was served as his impetus to convert over to Christianity.
And it was Milvian Bridge, and he saw this cross, this sign, conquer. Yeah, and that's when the devil joined the church.
Okay, so yes, as you said, you're right. He basically stopped the Roman persecution of Christianity. So why do I bring up somebody who died almost 1,700 years ago? And what impact does that have on us today? Well, in addition to stopping the Roman persecution of Christianity, it was he, as you said, who in 325 AD, so almost exactly 1,700 years ago, convened the Council of Nicaea.
Yep.
And so it was the first time where the state, where a government got involved in religious affairs.
That's when the devil joined the church, and that's when it had to go underground. And then you start having all these heretics start arising, like Origen, and you name it. And the church, the true body of Christ, has gone underground by this time with that horrible Council of Nicaea.
Okay, so that actually gave rise to the expression called Constantinianism, meaning the synthesis of church and state. So under the Catholic Church, the state, the magistrate, the government is simply nothing more than an annex of the church. And it is its job to punish dissidents, i.e. heretics.
That's right. And so what it is just a continuation of what Rome had, because the Caesar, he was united in all religious power and political power. That's why they called him Pontifex Maximus. So when Caesar will begin to cease to be Caesar, he's going to, I believe Gratian was the last Caesar, and then you're going to have, what is it, that one particular Caesar comes and he is the first pope. What's his name? It relieves me right now, but it's in the 4th century, the late 3rd century, and Damasus the first. And so it's just the devil taking the Roman Caesar and making a pope out of him. So it's the same powers, spiritual power and temporal power that the Caesar had. Now it's with the Pope, the Papa. And that's the devil's preservation of the Roman Empire and the Roman Caesar under the name of the Pope, until the final Pope comes to power, and he'll be slain with a sword, risen from the dead, rise and be Antichrist.
Now, my primary focus has been on the Catholic Church, although this did exist, or this attitude has existed in non-Catholic churches, such as in Eastern Orthodoxy. So for probably 800 years, 900 years, the Russian Orthodox Church was the official state religion of the Russian Empire.
That's right.
And Orthodoxy was the state religion of various other countries, Romania, unified Greece.
Serbia, Greece, that's right.
But you also have this in the West. So in places like in Scandinavian countries like Norway, Sweden, Denmark, the Lutheran Church is the state religion. That's also the case in Finland, And in England, the Church of England, or the Anglican Church, is the state religion there, as well as in several Commonwealth countries, such as in Australia and Canada.
Even though we disagree with that, because the Bible teaches an absolute separation of an organized government from an organized church, the Lord did use those governments to protect his elect in those countries for a long time. But they also persecuted those of us who were called independents or nonconformists, like Oliver Cromwell and others, and they did persecute us. Later, we're known as Baptists. But nonetheless, the church-state relationship in Protestantism, to a certain degree, protected us from the Roman armies.
Yes, and however, there's really no biblical mandate, at least in the New Testament era, for a state church, for a state religion.
Right. That's absolutely right, George.
And nowhere in the epistles or the writings of Paul does it say that you're supposed to turn heretics, real or otherwise, over to the civil authorities to be punished.
That's right.
That's a complete.
That's what the Jews were doing. That's what the religious Jewish leaders were doing. The Apostle Paul going out and arrest these Jewish believers, bringing them back and killing them. This whole concept of the Inquisition is not Roman. It's apostate Judaism. And they copied. The Romanists copied that from the Jews of the early centuries, first, second, third centuries, when they would persecute the Jewish believers in Christ.
Okay, so what people have done over the years, over the centuries, is they'll muddy the waters. They'll say, well, during the time of the Protestant Reformation, there was persecution on both sides. There was Catholic persecution of Protestants and others. There was Protestants persecuting Catholics. There was Protestants persecuting other Protestants. Well, perhaps
not very much. And furthermore, if there's any Protestant backlash, it's because the Papists started it. All the Protestants want to do is be left alone. But we got to be blamed for that, because I identify with certain Protestantisms. You know, I defend certain Protestant leaders, of course. So no, don't attack them. All they want to do is be separate and separate from Rome and have our own church and ultimately our own country. But no, Rome won't have that. So you drive us to the sword. You make us take up the sword. Go ahead, brother.
Okay, so anyhow, and as I've said before, as I've been saying for probably over 5 years since I've been streaming with you, is most people don't know this history. They just, they might learn a few things like, 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And because he wanted to prove the earth was...
And his filthy feet never touched America, thank God.
Well, yes, and of course... What are the old jokes? Well, he wanted to sail. Christopher Columbus decided to sail the ocean blue to prove the Earth wasn't flat. That was actually something I was taught.
They all knew it was a plane. This whole bit about the Earth being a globe goes back to the Jesuit conspiracy of persecuting Galileo, because Galileo said the Earth was a globe, and the Jesuits persecuted him for that because the Earth is flat, to try to debunk anybody that really believed the Earth is a plane. But so, go ahead, my brother. I think we're getting close to ending this. We're 1:34 now, and I think we probably
should. So just wrap it up. So I just want to say, and if I could just address the whole debate about the subject of the shape of the Earth, is some people get hot under the collar when you bring this up, because this has been my experience among professed Christians. Most of them don't have a problem with young Earth, saying the Earth is about 6,000 years old, perhaps a bit older. Fewer will have, when you start saying, well, what about geocentricity versus heliocentricity? Okay, yes, I'll have to learn how to speak. And just for clarification, geocentricity is the argument the sun travels around the Earth.
Say it slowly now, George. Heliocentricity. Heliocentricity.
Well, geocentricity.
Geocentricity is that the Earth is the center of things. Heliocentricity is the sun is the center of things. Sun-centered. Sun-centered or Earth-centered. But let's pronounce it properly, because our listeners need to pronounce these words, okay?
Okay. So as I said, most professed Christians, at least Protestants, evangelicals, Baptists, whatever you want to say, don't have a problem with a young Earth. When you start talking about geocentricity versus heliocentricity, most people will say, okay, yeah, I can accept geocentricity. However, when you come up to the whole idea of flat Earth or non-spinning ball, for some people that is a bridge too far. I'm sorry, you lost me.
Because they're watching TV every night. They're watching TV every night, and the introduction to all these movies, they have a globe. Universal Pictures, they got a globe and whatever else. So it's globe, brainwashed with a globe paranoia, and before you're going to watch a movie. Now Paramount doesn't do that, but most of the others do.
Okay, so if I could address that, and this will probably be my final point of the stream, without even talking about the Bible. Let's just say the Bible is not part of the equation. Without talking about various works like, was it Terra Firma by Wordley Scott?
David Wordlow Scott. Yeah. David
Wordlow Scott. I've not read that. It's on my queue. Okay, so even
probably
if there weren't these books.
Go ahead.
Okay, just by simple observation, you can tell the Earth is not moving, you can tell the Earth is not spinning, and you can tell it's stable. It's not at a tilted angle. I don't see what is controversial about any of those observations. You could debate, the precise shape of the Earth. Okay, yeah, but just making those observations, just pointing out those simple facts, I don't see why people would have any qualms with that. And something I was taught, growing up, basically, so you're going back decades ago, is that the Earth is approximately 93 million miles away from the sun.
Oh, yeah.
The moon is about 240,000 miles away, or give or take a couple thousand miles. Well, how do they know that? You must have an awfully long tape measure. And of course, they said we're spinning around at 1,000 miles an hour, or whatever it is, and we're traveling in X number of miles an hour through space.
That's right. That's all doctrine of the church. It's the church of science, falsely so called, but if you don't believe that doctrine of the church, you're a heretic. It's the same identical thing. Forget the facts. Forget the Earth is a plane. Forget that it can be proven to be a plane and flat. All you got to do is go up here and look across the waters from New Jersey to New York, and if the Earth is around, there's no way you should be able to see that. But forget reason, logic, and common sense, because now we're talking about religion of these fanatics. And if you don't adopt the scientific religion of these fanatics, these science falsely so-called, well, now you're a heretic and you're ostracized, and we're going to call you a racist, a prejudiced, and bigot, and a propagandist, and a terrorist.
And don't forget white supremacists, white nationalists, neo-Nazi, neo-Confederate.
Neo-Nazi, neo-Confederate, that's right. Confederate flag, Nazi flag. Just keep that hammer. Just keep that hammer going.
Okay, so so just whatever ad hominems that they want to throw out at you. So, sure. And I'm just talking about simple observations, and people will respond. Well, okay, so I'll have next week we're on. We can possibly address some of the counter arguments for why the Earth is a spinning ball. But so shall I give out my contact information?
Please do, George. Please give your contact info, and you've summed it up, and then we'll go.
Okay. So if people have any questions, comments, concerns, critiques, please email me at georgewidger1969@gmail.com. That's GEORWID1969@gmail.com. If there's a topic you'd like me to cover, go over again. If you'd just like to share something with me, like a local news article, whatever, please do so. And I'll do my best to get back to you in a timely manner. And if I don't respond with you in 24 hours, please just send me another email. I probably just simply forgot.
Well, George, I'm glad to know that I'm not the only one that's forgetting. All right, thanks so much, George Widger, for being with us today. And we've had a nice, wonderful August the 13th today for an hour and a half. I trust that you have enjoyed George and my ramblings, as well as George's facts that he brings up. So hopefully something was in there that you could use. Please send your gifts to rbpbdonate@comcast.net, rbpbdonate@comcast.net, or you can send a gift to my Cash App at Eric, ERIC, John, JON, Phelps, PHELPS, or you can send a check the old ways. The old ways are the best ways. You can send a check to RBT, P.O. Box 306, Newmanstown, Pennsylvania 17073. Appreciate your prayers, 2 minutes a day, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting, that we might continue to preach the true gospel while exposing the papacy. By the way, the gospel is Jesus Christ died for your sins, that he was buried and rose again. God calling all men everywhere to repent, Acts 17:30, and to believe this gospel of 1 Corinthians 15, 1-4. And that's our prayer here, that the elect listening would hear, be saved, and the Lord would continue to build his church until the fullness of the Gentiles. And in the meantime, we can expose the devil and his Roman papacy and his Jesuit order, building their world empire with Satan's mystery of iniquity. So we continue to do those two things while George puts the flesh on the skeleton with all these Jesuit connections. So appreciate your prayers, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting. And thank you for your gifts. Thank you for your prayers. And please continue to read the Reformation English Bible, which is the AV 1611 Reformation English Bible in its present edition of 1769. Right before we had our glorious American Revolution in 1775, and that Bible served as the basis for it. So, until we meet again, Lord bless, Maranatha.
Well,